Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is a Heel Heat Top 10. Now, the topic of this Top 10? Top 10 moments in the Monday Night War. Now, I'm going to be a little specific with this. This is strictly moments that happened on either Monday Night Raw or Monday Nitro. So anything that happened during that time on ECW, on a pay-per-view, on Thunder, Sunday Night Heat, Shotgun Saturday Night, doesn't quite make this list. So this is strictly moments from Raw and Nitro from the time of the Monday Night War. And specifically from that time period. First up, number 10, Lex Luger winning the World Championship on Nitro from Hulk Hogan. Probably would have been a lot higher on the list. This was at probably towards the height of the NWO popularity. Lex Luger was one of the few guys fighting back against them. He wins the title, 6 days later loses it back at a pay-per-view. Probably why it's this far down, but at the time, and watching it, I'm not a Luger fan, and I was cheering and wanting to see someone new and fresh and seeing the storyline move in that direction. Luger winning was a big moment and a big blow to the NWO, who had been dominating for the most part. To me, it was an opportunity missed. I think it could have been something much bigger, and that was a lot of the problem then with WCW and the NWO gimmick, but we'll get in. That's a different story for a different time. Strictly on the moment, it didn't hold up well because of what happened after, but the moment itself I thought was amazing. Number 9, Alundra Blaze, aka Medusa, shows up on Monday Nitro and throws the WWE Women's Championship in the trash. It was shocking. It was unexpected. It was a blow directly to the WWF at the time from WCW. Here you have their world champion in the women's division showing up on their biggest rivals TV show and pretty much saying that their world championship means nothing. I know it gets mentioned a lot in the highlight reels, but really it's one of those iconic moments that stick out in the history of Monday Nitro, in the history of WCW and the whole Monday Night Wars. It's something that just was so iconic and so burned into your brain that it was just one of the most shocking moments in wrestling history. Speaking of shocking, number 8, the DX invasion of the Monday Nitro. I mean, this was a direct shot fired from the WWF to WCW. This was WWE contracted wrestlers going to the arena where WCW was running a show and basically calling out WCW right there on the outside. This was probably as close to an actual confrontation as we'd ever seen or will ever see between WWE and WCW was this here. And I'm sorry if I keep going back between WWE and WWF. They were known as WWF at the time, but I digress. They're WWE now. But this was as close as it came. It was an interesting segment. It was fun. It was cool. It was different. It took balls to send 4 guys to a show that they may have got beaten up by the entire roster. It was just a fun, interesting thing, and one of the real shots, I think one of the real damaging blows to give WWE that final push to being the top company. Number 7, Goldberg winning the World Championship from Hulk Hogan. This was a huge moment at a huge show. 40,000 people packed the Georgia Dome. Should have been a pay-per-view main event. No argument on that. However, we were giving it free on Monday Nitro. It was the culmination of Goldberg and his run, a 3-day hype they put 40,000 people into the building on 3 days of hype. There should have been bigger hype to this. There should have been bigger draw to this. Should have been a pay-per-view match. Given what we were given, it was the peak of Goldberg and the peak of his popularity, and the peak of one of the huge moments in the rise and one of the huge moments in WCW history. Goldberg winning the championship. I thought this, again, it was another thing that could have built to so much more, but we were giving it on Monday Nitro, which is great. You love to see stuff like this given away for free. Amazing moment, amazing spot in time, an amazing time capsule onto the period of wrestling and the hotness and the just overall popularity of Bill Goldberg. Number 6, ECW invades Monday Night Raw. After a few weeks of Jerry Lawler talking trash, he invites the whole entire ECW roster to Monday Night Raw. We see the Eliminators show up, Tommy Dreamer, the Dudleys, Sabu and Taz, Mikey Whipwreck, and they start doing ECW style matches on Monday Night Raw, which kind of starts the ball rolling and brings us into the Attitude Era. Gives us a little bit of, we're finally seeing that WWE is acknowledging that there's other wrestling companies out there that are doing things. We're seeing some of the stars of the futures, Rob Van Dam, Sabu, Rob Van Dam, Taz, Tommy Dreamer, Dudley Boys, all would go on to become WWE stars, but we're seeing them, and a lot of people for the very first time, help to change the culture in the WWE and change the show and get it to the point where it starts the catalyst for the Attitude Era, which eventually is what catapults WWE back to the top. Number 5, probably one of the biggest moments in Chris Jericho's career, his debut on Monday Night Raw. The countdown that had been going on for 5 months, I believe, ends in the middle of a Rock promo. Rock's in the ring cutting his promo. The countdown ends for the countdown to the Millennium. It's Y2J Chris Jericho. Comes out in what has to be one of the greatest debuts in the history of wrestling in a company. Just comes out, shows where a guy from WCW that never was allowed to get past the mid-card comes into WWE, is right on the top of the company, and over the years becomes one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, is allowed to reach his full potential, and becomes one of the catalysts and one of the first guys, real major stars, to go from WCW to WWE. For years it was the opposite way. Guys like Hall and Nash and Hogan and Savage all were leaving WWE for WCW. Finally we get a guy coming from WCW to WWE. So we start seeing a little bit of the shift of the guard, and we see the beginnings of what's going to be a future megastar. Our number 4 is the day after WrestleMania 14. It was pretty much a reset button for the entire company. Shawn Michaels would go on his 4-year hiatus. DX didn't know where it was going to be, was in limbo. Triple H comes out. It says if you're going to start it, you got to start with your family, your blood, and the kid, which is what they were calling him. 1, 2, 3 kid. 6. Then come back and become X-Pac. Returns. The return of X-Pac. The shoot interview he does in the ring, talking trash about Hogan, Bischoff, saying that Hall and Nash want to come back to WWE, that they're miserable. It really ushered in a new era, and I think it made the return of X-Pac and that whole show, that whole Monday Night Raw, I think, in my opinion, that's the best run Monday Night Raw of all time. The day after WrestleMania 14, I think, was the greatest Monday Night Raw we've ever seen, and probably going to be one of the greatest of all time. That whole feeling, that whole vibe, like I said with Jericho, this was a little before him. This was a guy, X-Pac, who was a star in WWE, went to WCW, arguably one of the stars in the NWO, kind of made look as a middle card talent, came back to WWE, was a guy that WWE got back one of their stars, and kind of sort of helped DX go from Triple H and Shawn to the DX Army era of the Outlaws, X-Pac, China, and Hunter. Making it solidified, keeping the ball rolling, giving them that dominant face or heel faction over the years, and giving them one of the great Monday Night Raws, in my opinion, the best Monday Night Raw of all time. Number 3, the very first night, on the very first Nitro, we have Lex Luger jumping ship. The very first shot fired in the Monday Night War. It was shocking, it was surprising. They put it on, if you guys remember, back in that time, Monday Night Raw would have a couple weeks off every year for the Westminster Dog Show, which took precedence on the USA Network. Weird to think that now, with the ratings that WWE gets, but at that time, the Dog Show would blow them away in ratings. So they were preempted a couple weeks a year. WCW takes advantage, puts on a show on that Monday night that they're preempted, and one of the guys that you just seen in WWE is on Monday Nitro. They act like it's a surprise. He is a surprise to most of the people in the locker room as well as the audience. It's the first shot fired, the first time we see that WCW is really playing or trying to level the playing field with WWE. They take a star from the WWE right at the peak of his popularity and bring him in as part of their first Monday Nitro. Our number 2 is the arrival of Scott Hall on Monday Nitro. This was much like Luger, much like Medusa. It was a shock factor. Here's Razor Ramon walking through the crowd, interrupting a match, cutting a promo, basically without saying it officially, saying that WWE is coming to attack WCW. That you guys want a war, we're bringing the war to you, which end up in some lawsuits. But it's the beginning of the NWO, the beginning of the Outsiders, the beginning of the hottest angle in the history of WCW, probably in the history of wrestling. They come out, he comes out, shakes things up. The whole industry's turned on its head based on this one appearance. Now, before we get into our number 1, we do a little thing here called the best of the rest. Basically, it's the stuff that when we put together this list, it was considered for it, but for whatever reason just didn't make it into the top 10. Now, these are in no particular order. They're just what they are. The very last Monday Nitro / Monday Night Raw simulcast, it was a weird vibe, strange to see Vince McMahon on both shows. The end of an era for Monday Nitro. No one knew what was going to happen going forward. Was Vince going to keep WCW as a different show? Who was going to get hired? Who was going to get fired? Who was going to come over to WWE? Who was going to be released from WWE to make room? How was this going to go going forward? Really interesting moment. A really weird moment at the time. A really weird vibe. WCW had been on its last legs. It was kind of like that pet that you grow up with as a kid, that as it gets older your family has to put down. you love it and you know it's time for it to go, but even when it gets put down, it's a sad moment and just a weird vibe. A great shows on both half. One of the weirdest, most surreal moments in the history of wrestling. Also, we had the jump of the Radicals. I think one of the real turning points and one of the real times we really see the ship sinking in WCW. They lose 4 top tier talents in Perry Saturn, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, and Chris Benoit. All jump at the same time, all show up on Monday Night Raw, bolster WWE's roster while depleting WCW's roster. I mean, 2 of the 4 guys would go on to be WWE champions. The other 2 having solid careers in WWE, as well as all 4 of them having solid WCW careers. I thought this defection of 4 top-tier talents that can put on amazing matches really hurt WCW, really helped WWE. It was a whole paradigm shift where where the great wrestlers that were on WCW are now on WWE. Also, we had the return of Ric Flair after a hiatus and the reformation of the Four Horsemen. Great moment, great promo. They did absolutely nothing with it afterwards, which is probably why it didn't make the top 10 itself. But it was one of the great moments, one of the great Ric Flair moments. He had Arn Anderson coming out saying there's a new Four Horsemen, Mongo McMichael, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and he forgot a guy. Oh yeah, Ric Flair. Flair comes out, cuts his famous promo, dissing Bischoff. Just the passion, the heart, the care. They really should have brought the Four Horsemen into the next generation. Unfortunately, the ball was dropped on the angle, but one of the great moments, one of the great feelings, one of the great, heartfelt tugging at your heartstrings. Flair was back where he belonged. And last but not least, on the best of the rest, we have the Pillman 911 moment. Now, if you don't know what that is just from saying that, you probably haven't been watching wrestling for a long time. We have the incident where Brian Pillman's at home with an injury. Steve Austin is threatening to go to his home to attack him. Kevin Kelly's at the home with Pillman doing an interview. Pillman shows that he has a gun if Austin comes. Austin finally makes it there, beats up some of Pillman's friends, breaks into the house. We hear a shot go off. The TV monitors get lost. The whole thing goes into craziness. It's implied that Pillman shot Austin. It's the one moment where wrestling in WWE went further than anybody ever did before and anybody ever will again. Brian Pillman took him to the moment that is ingrained into your brain as the most extreme moment in the history of all of professional wrestling. Now, before we go into number 1, if you think we left something off the list, if you think we put something too high, something too low, forgot something altogether, let us know what you think. Hit us up on Facebook, hit us up on Twitter, leave a comment down there in the comment box. Now, coming off of that, our number 1 moment in the Monday Night War, Mick Foley winning the World Championship on Monday Night Raw. This moment, so important to Mick Foley's career, so important to the history of the WWF, so important to the history of wrestling. It cannot be overstated the impact of Mick Foley winning the World Championship on Monday Night Raw. We have the infamous Tony Schiavone telling us, don't turn to Monday Night Raw because they got a guy there, Mick Foley, that used to wrestle here as Cactus Jack. And I'm saying this word for word because it's one of the most amazingly stupid things that's ever been done in wrestling. He goes, you got a guy there that used to wrestle here named Cactus Jack, under Cactus Jack. that's going to win their world championship. Mick Foley's going to become the world champion. That's going to put a lot of butts in seats. When the Nielsen ratings come out, 700,000 people switched their channel from Monday Nitro to Monday Night Raw so they could see a guy who I will argue is the most universally beloved wrestler of all time, my all-time favorite, Mick Foley, Mankind, win the World Championship for the first time. It was such a feel-good moment, such a bonehead blunder by WCW. They drove half of their audience, or a quarter of their audience away, gave that audience to WWE, who won the ratings war that night, and never looked back from that time on. It was shots fired, it was WCW trying to be petty, trying to take a dig at a guy that they didn't realize was more popular than they could ever imagine. I mean, wrestling fans, WCW fans, ECW fans, WWE fans, universally, Japanese wrestling fans all loved Mick Foley. And Mick Foley finally got to the championship. It was our guy. It was one of us. It was someone that we cheered for. He shouldn't have been there. He didn't have the look. He was fired from WCW. WWE didn't really want him. He was a guy that every wrestling fan had a connection with. He was an everyman. And when he finally wins the title, the whole wrestling world rejoices. It's one of those moments in wrestling history where everybody in the wrestling world, every wrestling fan, was genuinely happy for a guy that probably deserved to be a world champion as much, if not more, than anybody else. And that championship run, and Mick Foley being risen to the level of a world champion, in my opinion, is really the final nail in the coffin of WCW, which goes on to limps on for another 2 years, but never ever was really the same as it was before that time. Basically, that's all I have to say about this top 10. My name is George Coles. This has been another episode of Heel Heat.